The reception hall shimmered with soft yellow lights and the faint scent of lemon polish. I sat at the long head table, my hands folded neatly in my lap, the hem of my navy silk dress grazing the polished wood beneath me. There were maybe 50 people in that room. And I could feel every one of their stares. They weren't looking at my smile. They were reading the lines near my mouth, measuring the gray in my roots, asking with their eyes what kind of mother lets things fall apart so quietly. Before we go any further, take a second to subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're joining me from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Let me take you back. Not far. Just 5 years. Winter had just settled in for good that year. You know, the kind of cold that gets into your knees and won't leave. My husband, Charles, died on a Tuesday morning. We'd had oatmeal and a single boiled egg, like always. I still remember I forgot to salt the water. He didn't say a word about it. Just smiled, held my hand across the table, and said he felt tired. By noon, he was gone. The nurse had stepped out to check a beeping monitor. When she came back, there was nothing left to adjust. It wasn't dramatic. There were no machines flaring, no final words whispered into the air like in movies. Just a silence that felt oddly familiar. Like something I'd known was coming. Still, I sat there long after they took him. Same kitchen chair. Same wool cardigan. Just me, and the faint smell of burnt toast lingering from earlier. People came, of course. They always do. The neighbors with their casseroles that no one ever finishes. The women from church with cards and soft-voiced sympathy. My sister sent a candle in the mail. Lavender. I never lit it. I wore black for 2 months. Then gray. Then something close to blue, but not quite. I organized the closets. Rearranged the pantry twice. Cried exactly 4 times, each one quieter than the last. I didn't want pity. I wanted something else. Something I couldn't name at the time. The house, once loud with little things, Charles tapping his mug, humming on the back porch, whistling when he read the paper, grew still. And not the peaceful kind. It was a dry kind of stillness. The kind where even the clock ticks sound like they're trying too hard. I started leaving the TV on at night. Not for watching. Just for the sound. Judge reruns and the low hum of weather updates filled the space between breaths. I'd sit on the couch with my feet tucked under me and press the remote every 30 minutes to keep it from asking if I was still there. Sometimes I wasn't sure. I learned the difference between lonely and alone. Alone is physical. It's a room without another voice. Lonely is internal. It's having no one to tell you about the strange dream you had. Or the fact that the bread you bought already smells off. It's waking up at 3 a.m. just to check that you're still breathing. People assume grief hits like a truck. But for me, it was more like a slow drip. A faucet you can't quite turn off. I found myself talking to Charles sometimes. Asking where he put the tax papers. Scolding him for not replacing the light bulb in the laundry room. Laughing when I remembered he used to forget his keys twice a week. I knew he couldn't hear me. But it didn't matter. There was a chair by the window in our bedroom, right next to the radiator that always clicked before it warmed. I started sitting there every morning with a cup of weak coffee. Watching the street. The mailman. The woman across the road who walked her dog in her husband's flannel coat. Time passed differently in that chair. Slower, but not gentler. One morning, I caught my reflection in the glass. I didn't recognize myself. Not at first. My hair had thinned. My skin looked tired. But it was my eyes that surprised me most. They were still sharp. Still watching. Still waiting for something. I didn't know what. Grief is funny. It doesn't always look like sobbing or screaming. Sometimes it looks like making scrambled eggs for two out of habit. Or setting the table with two napkins. Or pausing before turning off the porch light, just in case he was still out there, walking up the drive. People asked if I thought about moving. A smaller place. A condo near the library. I smiled and said I wasn't ready. But the truth was, that house was all I had left of him. The creak in the hallway floor. The garden he trimmed every Sunday. Even the burnt orange tiles he hated in the kitchen. They mattered. I clung to them like proof that I still existed. That he did too. But time kept going. Like it always does. And eventually, I stopped setting two places at dinner. I started folding the laundry slower. I drank my coffee black again. Then one day, as I sat at that same kitchen table, watching the light fall just right across the floorboards, I reached out. Not for the salt. Not for my phone. For memory. And what I found wasn't just a memory. It was the moment everything started to unravel. But I'll get to that. First, I want you to understand how it felt to lose him. To hold a hand that had held yours for 40 years and feel it go still. Completely still. His fingers squeezed mine one last time. Then let go. It was a Thursday, I think. Late March. The kind of morning that still felt like winter, even though the calendar insisted otherwise. I was standing in the kitchen, barefoot on the cold linoleum, waiting for the kettle to hum. The light through the window came in slanted, soft and pale, catching the dust in the air like glitter. I remember the smell of the lemon cleaner I'd used on the counter. I'd been scrubbing more than usual those days. It gave my hands something to do. That was the morning Eli came home. I heard the front door open before I saw him. The sound of it, familiar, hollow, made something tighten in my chest. Then footsteps. Not hurried, not hesitant. Just steady. He walked into the kitchen carrying a paper bag, like he'd just come back from the store instead of the edge of a bad year. "Hey, Mom," he said, smiling in that crooked way of his. "Hope you still like blueberry bagels." I froze for a second. Then nodded. Of course I did. I always did. He sat down at the table like he'd never left. Pulled two bagels out of the bag and started slicing them while I poured the coffee. No questions. No explanations. Just quiet comfort. Like he knew I wouldn't ask. And he was right. I didn't. We ate in near silence. The butter melted too quickly on mine. The jam was a little tart. He didn't finish his second half. Just stared out the window at the neighbor's leafless tree. "Lost the job," he said finally, his voice low. 2 weeks ago. I looked at him, waiting for more. There was none. "It's just temporary," he added after a beat. "I'll find something else. I just needed to come home for a bit." Something in me softened. Like a tired muscle unclenching. I nodded once. That was all he needed. And all I could offer. That evening, I pulled out the old popcorn pot. The one Charles never let me throw out, even when the handle came loose. Eli found the duct tape and fixed it like it was an act of service. We watched an old western on the television. The picture was fuzzy and the volume had to be turned up high, but we both knew the plot before it unfolded. The good guy wins. The horse never dies. He laughed once. A small sound, but it filled the room like wind through an open window. The next morning, I heard the shuffle of his slippers down the hallway. Mine used to be the only sound in that house. My own steps. My own voice humming to fill the quiet. Now, with his steps echoing mine, it felt almost like music. He started helping with the groceries. Replaced the bulb in the hallway light that had been out for 3 weeks. Tightened the loose handle on the fridge. Sat with me at dinner. Asked how I'd slept. It felt like rewinding time, but not fully. He was older now. Thinner. He drank his coffee black. But he was here. And that was something. I began to look forward to our mornings. He'd bring in the paper, always folded wrong, and we'd take turns reading parts aloud. I started baking again. Banana bread with too many walnuts. Eli hated walnuts, but he ate it anyway. Said it reminded him of Sundays when he was a kid. There was a day, one I remember more clearly than the rest, when we sat by the window as the rain started. It wasn't heavy, just soft tapping against the glass. He was telling me about a guy at work who'd tried to lift a pallet the wrong way. I wasn't really listening to the story. I was listening to the sound of his voice. The rhythm of it. The way it curled around the ordinary. I realized then I'd been holding my breath for months. Maybe years. That night, as I folded laundry in the living room, he walked in carrying 2 mugs of tea. I hadn't asked for any. He just knew. He handed me one, then sat down beside me, cross-legged like he used to when he was 10. "Thanks for letting me stay," he said softly. I looked at him, really looked. There was stubble on his chin. A line between his brows I didn't remember. He seemed tired. But also grounded in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. "You don't have to thank me," I said. "This is your home." He gave a half-smile and stared into his mug for a while before speaking again. "Don't worry, Mom. I'm not going anywhere. I'll always be here." I nodded. I smiled. And I believed him. Not because I was sure. But because I wanted to. He said, "I'll always be here, Mom." I believed him. Only because I wanted to. It was a Sunday afternoon when Eli brought her over. I remember because I had just taken a lemon pound cake out of the oven, the kind Charles used to love with his coffee. The smell filled the house, warm and sweet, mixing with the faint scent of furniture polish and the lavender I'd sprayed in the hallway. The windows were open just a crack to let in the early spring breeze. It was a soft day. Nothing sharp or difficult. Until the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on the edge of my apron and opened the door. She was standing beside Eli, one hand resting lightly on his arm. Tall, tan, perfectly put together. Her hair was sleek and straight, not a strand out of place. She wore a cream blouse tucked into tight gray pants and heels that didn't belong on our porch. Patent leather, off-white, no scuff marks. Too new for this old neighborhood. "Hi," she said, smiling in that way people do when they don't mean it. "You must be Martha. I've heard so much about you." Her voice was high and smooth, like the women in commercials selling perfume or cruise tickets. I nodded. "Come in." She stepped inside and immediately looked around. Not with wonder. With assessment. Her eyes moved over the framed photographs on the mantel, the crocheted afghan on the couch, the stack of books I hadn't had time to dust. She didn't touch anything. Just kept her arms close to her body like the air itself might cling to her blouse. Eli followed behind her, giving me a look that was part excited, part pleading. I smiled, tight but polite, and gestured toward the living room. Make yourselves comfortable. She sat on the very edge of the couch. Not back against the cushions, not relaxed. Just perched, like a bird ready to fly. Her knees were pressed together, hands folded on top. The shoes stayed perfectly aligned, heels barely making contact with the carpet. This place is so quaint, she said, looking around again. I heard the pause in her voice. The way she hesitated before picking her word. Quaint. Not cozy. Not charming. Quaint. She might as well have said old. Feels like stepping into history, she added, flashing another smile. This one even smaller than the last. I poured tea for all of us. She didn't take sugar. Said she was cutting back. Left the lemon wedge untouched on the saucer. I offered her cake, and she declined with a wave of her manicured hand. Said she was trying to stay low carb. Eli laughed nervously and took 2 slices. I watched them as they talked. Or rather, as she talked. Eli mostly nodded. He told me they met at a friend's engagement party. She worked as an assistant for a real estate attorney downtown. Her family owns several rental properties and a bridal boutique chain upstate. She liked to keep busy, she said. Couldn't stand being idle. She asked no questions about me. Didn't notice the photos of Eli as a child. The one of him in a lion costume for Halloween. The finger painting he made in 1st grade that still hung in the hallway, even though it had faded to a strange bluish gray. At one point, she excused herself to the restroom. Her heels clicked sharply down the hallway. I flinched at the sound, like it was too loud for the house. Too sharp for the silence I'd carefully rebuilt. When she was gone, Eli turned to me. She's nervous, he said. She's just not used to older homes. I nodded, even though he didn't need me to. He was already looking at his phone, texting someone. Probably her. From the bathroom. I tried to like her. I did. I even cleaned the house again after they left, just in case I'd missed a smudge that embarrassed him. I refolded the Afghan. Rearranged the salt and pepper shakers. Sat down in the spot she had barely touched and pressed my hand into the cushion, trying to feel if she'd left any warmth. She hadn't. That night, I found her perfume lingering in the hallway. Sharp and floral. Something expensive. It stuck to the air like static. I opened a window. Over the next few days, Eli talked about her more. He laughed louder when he mentioned her name. Used phrases she used. Told me I should try eating less salt. Said my slippers were loud on the hardwood floor. Suggested I donate some of the old books, or maybe switch out the drapes. I didn't argue. Not yet. I told myself it was fine. That he was happy, and that was what mattered. But part of me had started watching. Noticing. I noticed how he stood straighter when she was around. How his voice changed, more clipped, more careful. How he stopped humming when he made coffee. How he skipped our morning tea twice that week. There was a Saturday afternoon when she dropped by without him. Just to say hi, she said. I served her lemon water and tried not to stare when she wiped the glass before taking a sip. She complimented the backsplash in the kitchen. Said it was retro. Asked if I'd ever thought of remodeling. I smiled. I told her the tiles were original. Charles had installed them himself. She tilted her head. Said that was adorable. After she left, I stood in the kitchen for a long time. The tiles felt colder than usual. I ran my hand across them, slowly, like I was checking they were still there. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the way she looked at everything. Not with judgment exactly. With calculation. As if the house was a space she could redesign. As if I were part of the clutter. She had said the house felt like history. But what she meant was it felt like the past. And I had to wonder. Did she think I came with the furniture? The first time Eli said something, it was about the soup. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon. I had made chicken noodle, the kind with carrots sliced thin and extra thyme, just how he used to like it. I set the table with 2 bowls, folded napkins, warm rolls from the oven. The kind of dinner you make when you're grateful someone is home. He sat down, thanked me softly, then took one bite and reached for his water. "Little salty, Mom," he said. Not cruel. Not loud. Just matter of fact. He smiled after, like it was nothing. I nodded and said I'd go easier on the broth next time. But I remembered tasting it. I remembered thinking it was just right. The next comment came 2 days later. We were in the living room. I was walking past him to grab my sewing basket when he flinched slightly at the sound of my slippers on the hardwood floor. He didn't say anything at first, just glanced up from his phone, then back down. "You ever think about switching those for something quieter?" he asked. I blinked. "The slippers?" "Yeah, just, sometimes in the mornings, you know. The floors echo." He didn't say it mean. He never did. But there was a new edge to his voice I couldn't quite place. Something borrowed. Something not his. I nodded again, said I'd look into it. But I kept the slippers. They were warm. They were mine. Then there was the conversation about my clothes. Chloe had stopped by that afternoon, just long enough to leave her perfume in the hallway again. I had been wearing a long knit sweater and one of Charles's old button-downs. I was comfortable. It was my house. After she left, Eli lingered near the sink while I washed the cups. "Hey, maybe next time we have company, you could." "I don't know. Dress up a little?" I turned to look at him. He shifted his weight. "It's just. Chloe said you're always in cardigans and old shirts. Thought maybe you'd feel better if you wore something a little more current." I smiled, because I didn't know what else to do. The thing about comments like that is they don't land like punches. They land like dust. Slowly. Quietly. Until you're covered. I kept cooking, though. Every evening, I lit a candle on the table. Nothing fancy. Just something to make the house feel warm. I used the blue plates Charles loved, even though one had a crack down the side. I folded napkins the way Eli did when he was a boy, helping me prepare for guests. I added extra herbs. I watched the meat so it wouldn't dry. Some nights, he didn't come down for dinner. Said he was busy. Said he'd already eaten with Chloe. Said he wasn't feeling great. I started putting his plate in the fridge. Labeled it with his name like it was something sacred. Most mornings, I'd find it untouched. He stopped asking how I slept. Stopped fixing little things around the house. The back door hinge still squeaked when it closed. The porch light flickered, but only when it rained. Instead, he started bringing up changes. "Chloe thinks the living room's a little cramped. Maybe we could get rid of some of the older furniture. Have you thought about painting the hallway? That beige makes it feel kind of tired." I nodded. I always nodded. It felt easier than saying no. Because what would saying no do? One night, I made a roast. Potatoes, carrots, rosemary. The whole house smelled like Sunday dinners from a decade ago. I set the table for two, as always. Placed the dishes just right. Eli didn't come down. I waited 20 minutes. Then 30. Finally, I went to his room. The door was closed. I knocked once. "Hey, dinner's ready." A pause. "Sorry, Mom. Chloe just brought something over." "I'm good, thanks." I walked back to the kitchen and looked at the food. Still steaming. Still perfect. I sat down. The chair across from me was empty. I took a bite. It tasted fine. It tasted like nothing. After that, I started cooking less. Soup from a can. Toast with butter. Leftovers from the freezer I'd packed during a more hopeful season. He didn't seem to notice. Chloe came around more. Her laughter echoing in the hallway like something expensive. I stopped joining them in the living room. Let them talk. Let them plan. Sometimes I'd hear them from the stairs. Low voices. Soft jokes. Once, I heard her say, "She still uses that old kettle?" Eli laughed. "It works. Still. Looks like something from a museum." I didn't move. Didn't cough. Didn't let the stairs creak. Just sat there in the dark, hands folded in my lap. I started going to bed earlier. Not because I was tired. Because the house didn't need me awake. That week, I threw out the candle I used to light at dinner. Didn't feel right anymore. And then one evening, I made spaghetti. Just enough for two. Sauce from scratch. Parmesan grated fresh. I set the table. Only one person sat down. Me. The clock ticked in the background. A slow, steady beat. The kitchen light flickered once. The fork was heavy in my hand. And I realized. For the first time in years, I was having dinner alone. In my own kitchen. It started with laundry. Not a revelation, not a storm, just a basket of folded clothes and a headache behind my left eye. The sun was low that afternoon, filtering in through the blinds like it wasn't sure it belonged. Eli said he was running errands. Chloe had stopped by earlier but left before lunch. I took the opportunity to clean. It gave me something to do, something that felt like purpose, even if the house barely needed it anymore. His room still smelled faintly of cedar and detergent, the kind I always used. The bed wasn't made. The fitted sheet clung to one corner but had slipped on the other. I pulled it tight and smoothed it flat with the palm of my hand. The window was cracked open just enough to let in a chill. I closed it. The silence settled again. I was about to leave when I noticed the edge of something red peeking out from beneath the bed. I almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, I knelt, my knees pressing into the old rug, and reached for it. A worn folder, bright crimson, the kind Charles used to keep bills in. My name was written in black ink on the tab. My hands didn't shake yet. Not until I opened it. The first page was crisp. Too crisp. I saw the letterhead, the bolded type. Home equity loan. $30,000. Approved. Collateral, the house. My house. My name was there at the top, full and formal, spelled correctly. Martha Louise Bennett. I stared at it, feeling my breath slow down in a strange, deliberate way. At the bottom, a signature. Mine. Supposedly. But I had never signed it. I flipped to the next page. More documents. Copies of my driver's license. Old tax forms. A black and white photo of the house taken from the sidewalk. On the back, in a tidy hand, someone had written, "Appraised. Minimal upgrades. Transfer within 90 days." There was a smaller envelope tucked inside the pocket. Pink paper. Folded neatly. The ink was bright. Bubblegum pink. The kind I hadn't seen since middle school. Eli. My parents are fine with the plan. After the wedding, we'll have full control of the house. Your mom shouldn't live there anymore, it's too much liability. Start looking into assisted living. Nothing fancy. Just somewhere with supervision. We can sell the antiques, the old furniture, cover the first few months that way. Don't feel guilty. It's better this way. Clean. She's had her time. There was no signature. Just a tiny heart, drawn in pink ink. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the paper still open in my lap. The blinds cast narrow shadows across the floor. I stared at them. Tried to count them. Failed. My name. My home. My son. I pressed the tips of my fingers against my temples. Felt the throb. A slow, low pulse like water dripping behind a wall. I don't know how long I sat there. Eventually, I folded the letter and slid it back into the folder. My motions were careful. Mechanical. I placed the folder on my lap, closed my eyes, and listened to the sound of my own breath. It felt foreign. Shallow. Too fast. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I stood up, walked back to my room, and placed the folder inside the old armoire Charles built, beneath a stack of sweaters I never wore anymore. I closed the door gently. Then I went into the kitchen and made tea. Chamomile. No sugar. No lemon. The kettle whistled. I turned off the stove and poured slowly, watching the steam rise. The mug felt heavy in my hand. I sat at the table and stared out the window at the backyard. The swing set, rusted now. The garden, overgrown since Charles passed. The bird bath he once repaired after a winter storm, still leaning slightly to the left. And I kept thinking. What kind of son would let this happen? What kind of woman was I, to raise someone who thought I could be replaced like a broken lamp? What had I missed? What had I chosen not to see? The refrigerator buzzed. Somewhere outside, a dog barked once, then fell silent. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept hearing the sound of paper, shuffling in the dark. In the morning, I returned to his room. Pulled the folder out again. This time, I looked at the signature longer. The loops. The spacing. Close. But not mine. Not really. I traced it with my finger. Then I whispered to the empty room. My name is printed in bold. But that signature? It doesn't belong to me. It was taped to the back of the folder. A small black USB drive, barely the length of my thumb. I almost missed it. The tape had yellowed slightly at the edges, the way old Scotch tape does when it's been sitting too long in one place. I peeled it off slowly, careful not to tear the label stuck to its side. In faint blue ink, someone had written one word. Audio. I held it in my palm for a moment, just looking at it. My hand felt too warm. My skin, too tight. There was a part of me that didn't want to know. That hoped it was something boring. Technical. A backup for a tax file, maybe. A legal document read aloud. Anything but what I feared it was. But I already knew. I walked to the kitchen, plugged it into the side of my old laptop, the one Charles gave me on our 30th anniversary. It whirred to life slowly, the screen casting a faint glow across the table. I sat in the dark, fingers curled over the mouse like it might bite. There were 10 files. All dated. I clicked on the first. It started mid-sentence. 3,000 saved in the drawer, under the kettle. Just in case. You never know. My voice. Clear. Steady. Familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. Then his. Yeah, smart, Mom. That's safe with me. Silence. A clink. The soft scrape of a chair. I paused the playback. The room around me went quiet again, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft thud of my heart. I looked down at the keyboard, the keys worn where my fingers always rested. I pressed play again. The second clip was shorter. I was humming. Something old, maybe a hymn. Then. You could sell most of that old furniture. Bet you'd get decent money. I laughed in response. A small, unsure sound. You think so? Sure. Some people love antiques. Especially if they don't know the story behind them. His voice again. Light. Casual. As if discussing weather. I stopped the clip. My throat felt thick. I clicked through the rest. One by one. Small, mundane moments. Me talking about the leaky faucet. About Charles's favorite casserole dish. About Chloe's perfume giving me a headache. All things you say in your own home, when you think no one's taking notes. But someone had been. Each word now felt sharpened. Lifted out of context and pinned to a board like evidence. Not conversation. Ammunition. I closed the laptop. Slowly. Gently. Like anything louder might crack the silence too wide. I sat there in the dark, my hands resting on the closed lid, breathing slow and even. The walls felt closer somehow. The air, too still. He had recorded me. In my own kitchen. At my own table. I tried to make sense of it. Was it Chloe's idea? Had they planned it from the beginning? Or was Eli just collecting things? Preparing. Building some warped case against me in whispers and wave files. I remembered the way he'd asked me to repeat things lately. How his phone was always on the counter. Face down. Close. I remembered Chloe's laugh the week before, sharp and small, when I mentioned donating the old piano. Don't get rid of anything just yet, she'd said. You never know what could be useful. I thought she meant emotionally. Sentimentally. Now, I wasn't sure. I stood up and poured a glass of water. The tap sputtered once before the stream smoothed out. I watched it fill, not blinking. Not thinking. The glass was cool in my hand. Real. Tangible. Unlike trust. I took a sip and looked out the window. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. The swing moved gently in the breeze, though I hadn't felt any wind. I wondered how many nights I'd sat there, with him beside me, not knowing he was saving my words like proof. Like warnings. I thought of the way he smiled when I brought him tea. The way he said, "Thanks, Mom," without looking up. The way I believed we were healing something. The way I told myself we still had time. I wanted to cry. But I didn't. Tears didn't come. Just a deep, slow ache behind my eyes, like grief with nowhere to go. I picked up the USB. Turned it over in my fingers. Tucked it back into the folder. I didn't know what I'd do next. But I knew what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't speak freely again. Not to him. Not in that house. Not unless I was the one pressing record. And then, just before I turned off the light, I played one more clip. The final one. It was me, again. Soft. Thoughtful. Unaware. I know I talk to myself too much these days. But it helps. Talking fills the space. Then Eli, from somewhere further away in the room. That's fine. Just talk loud enough for the mic to catch it. I paused. The silence that followed was thick. Sticky. Not quiet. Not anymore. My voice played back, clear as glass. But I didn't remember saying those words. It was still dark when I got out of bed. Not early morning dark. Night dark. The kind of darkness where the house feels like it's holding its breath. I didn't bother turning on the light. My feet found the floor easily. The old wood was cool under my soles. I listened for movement, none. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator down the hall and the tick of the clock in the living room. Eli had left 10 minutes earlier. I heard the door shut, heard his car start, heard it pull away. That's when I knew I had a window. I opened the pantry and reached for the yellowed address book tucked between an old box of tea and a recipe folder I hadn't touched since Charles died. The cover was cracked. The pages smelled faintly of dust and lemon oil. I flipped through slowly, careful not to tear anything. There it was. Ellison, R. The name hadn't changed in 30 years. He'd been our attorney since we bought the house. Helped with Charles's will. Advised us after the pipe burst and flooded the basement in '02. The kind of man who wrote everything in blue ink, kept his shirt starched, and never once asked about your feelings. Exactly what I needed. I dialed the number with steady fingers. It rang twice. Ellison, came the voice. Same as I remembered. Gravelly but not rough. Sharp around the edges. This is Martha Bennett, I said. A pause. Then, Charles's wife? Yes. Another pause, longer. I need to speak with you privately. It's important. He didn't ask why. Just gave me a time. 2 days later, I walked up the narrow staircase above the old pharmacy downtown. The smell of eucalyptus balm and printer toner clung to the hallway. His door was still the same shade of faded navy, with the gold nameplate slightly crooked. He opened it himself. Martha, he said, nodding. His hair was thinner now, the frames of his glasses heavier. But his eyes were just as clear. The kind of eyes that see all the details first. We didn't hug. Inside, the office hadn't changed. Same green-shaded lamp. Same coat stand in the corner with no coat on it. The blinds were tilted just enough to catch the late morning sun, casting parallel lines across the floor. I sat down in the same leather chair I'd once sat in beside Charles, the day we signed the mortgage paperwork. I handed Ellison the red folder. He didn't speak for a long while. He read. His glasses slipped once down his nose. He pushed them back with his pinky, kept reading. Page after page. He lifted the letter written in pink ink. His expression didn't change. When he finished, he looked up. Martha, he said, slow and careful. How long have you known? 3 days. You haven't spoken to them? No. You planning to? I shook my head. He leaned back in his chair. It creaked softly. We can build a case, he said. I don't want revenge, I replied, steady as the window light. I want protection. That changed the way he looked at me. Not with pity. With respect. He pulled out a fresh notepad and started listing things. Documents to request. Records to duplicate. Steps to take quietly. We started with the will. Charles's original version had Eli as the primary heir. We rewrote that. Every dollar, every possession, every inch of the property was reassigned to the Riverton Children's Shelter. The same one Charles used to donate to each Christmas. It felt right. Not out of spite. But out of clarity. We reviewed the deed. Confirmed my name, and only mine, was on it. Ellison began drafting paperwork to flag the fraudulent loan. Quietly. Carefully. He said we'd need time. I gave him all the time he needed. That afternoon, as I walked home, the air felt different. The trees were still bare. The sidewalk still cracked. But something had shifted. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was moving. I got home before Eli. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet I used to fear. But this time, it felt like armor. I poured myself a cup of tea. Earl Grey. The kind Charles never liked. Sat by the window. Watched a bird struggle to pull a worm from the ground near the porch. It was messy. Inelegant. But the bird didn't stop. I thought about everything I'd read in that folder. The fake signature. The letter with the pink heart. The recordings. The evidence was there. But what broke me wasn't the documents. It was the familiarity. The ease with which they'd planned it all. The absence of doubt in their voices. Like I was already gone. But I wasn't. I was still here. And I had no interest in fighting fire with fire. I didn't want to scream or slam doors. That wasn't who I was. What I wanted was simpler. Quieter. To reclaim what was mine. And to make sure they never touched it again. I don't want revenge. I want to be left in peace. There's a certain power in being underestimated. It's not something I ever asked for. But it arrived, quietly, like most dangerous gifts do. One morning, I caught Eli glancing at me from across the kitchen table. Not like a son looks at a mother, but like a nurse studies a patient. Like he was measuring how much of me was left. That was the day I started pretending. I told him I'd been thinking. That maybe the house was too much for me now. Too many stairs. Too many rooms. I said it gently, folding my hands in my lap like I was afraid of my own words. He blinked. Then nodded, just once. Later that evening, he brought it up again. Said Chloe had found a couple of assisted living places not far from here. Clean. Quiet. He showed me a glossy brochure with smiling faces and pastel walls. I held it like it might crack open. I'm not saying it's time yet, he said. But it doesn't hurt to look. I agreed. And just like that, they believed me. The next day, I began rearranging things. I placed a small voice recorder inside the hollow base of the ceramic lamp on the hallway table. Another one behind the row of canned tomatoes in the pantry. One more under the cushion of the chair where Chloe always sat, careful never to lean back too far. Mr. Ellison had shown me how to use them. He handed me the small devices in a manila envelope at his office, walked me through each switch and tiny blinking light. Label the files. Save them daily. Stay consistent. He didn't ask how I planned to get them into place. I smiled. That part, I could manage. I started moving slower, letting my hands shake when I reached for my mug. Pausing longer between thoughts, like I couldn't find the right word. I muttered to myself when I walked into rooms. Just loud enough for the walls to hear. Eli noticed. Chloe smiled wider. They thought I was fading. Good. Chloe began staying later. Sometimes I'd find her wiping down the kitchen counters with a cloth from her own purse, rearranging the magnets on the fridge. Once, I walked in to see her standing in front of the hall mirror, adjusting her blouse like she already lived there. Thinking of changing the curtains, she said lightly. These block too much light. I nodded. One evening, I mentioned I was considering selling the piano. It had belonged to Charles's mother. I hadn't touched it in years. Chloe's eyes flickered. That could probably go for a good price, she said. We can get someone in for appraisals once everything's settled. I offered her tea. She declined, as always. Eli didn't even look up from his phone. At night, I sat in my room, back straight, headphones on, listening to their voices through tinny speakers. Chloe laughed more when she thought I wasn't there. Eli's tone shifted, more certain, more clipped. She's asking about the loan again, he said in one recording. Tell her it was just paperwork. She won't understand, Chloe replied. Another day, another recording. If she brings up the deed, change the subject. We're almost there. Almost where? I labeled each file. Tucked each flash drive into a hollowed-out book on the shelf that no one touched but me. During dinner, I'd casually ask Eli how much nursing homes cost these days. He'd glance at Chloe. She'd answer for him. Depends on the level of care. But we'd help with it, of course. They always said it kindly. As if they were doing me a favor. As if removing me from the home I'd scrubbed and painted and filled for over 30 years was a generous act. The more they smiled, the quieter I became. I stopped baking. Started burning small things on purpose. A piece of toast. The corner of a casserole. Enough to leave a scent. I'm distracted, I'd say. Forgetful lately. Chloe began offering to help with the bills. Eli handed me forms to sign, mostly harmless, but I read every line. Then photocopied them when no one was looking. They started referring to the house as ours in conversation. It slipped in slowly. We should change the floors in the den. Ours are too scuffed. I think our kitchen could use an update. Not hers. Ours. And I smiled every time. One afternoon, Chloe walked in carrying a large shopping bag. She unpacked linen hand towels, a candle that smelled like eucalyptus and mint, and a small box of hooks shaped like golden birds. Just a few updates, she said. Little touches. I watched her place the candle on the coffee table. The scent was sharp, unfamiliar. It smelled like someone else's home. Later, I took it and placed it in the bottom drawer of the guest room. Beside it, I taped another recorder. At night, I kept a list. Dates. Phrases. Things they said when they thought I wasn't listening. She nodded when I mentioned the care facility. She's moving slower every day. I think she's ready. I folded that list into my sweater drawer. Underneath Charles's old cufflinks. The ones no one remembered but me. I didn't like pretending. It scraped at something in me. But I'd learned, too late, that being honest had cost me more. So I nodded. And in my head, I hit record. The envelope was thick. Heavier than the usual mail. Cream-colored with a gold trim and my name written in the middle in swirling cursive. No return address, but I didn't need one. The way the paper smelled, faintly floral, overly formal, told me everything I needed to know. It was an invitation. Chloe and Eli's engagement dinner. Held at some rented reception hall in the nicer part of town. Dinner and dancing. Cocktail attire. An evening of celebration and new beginnings. That's what the card said. I held it over the sink for a moment, just watching the light shift across the lettering. I didn't tear it. Didn't burn it. I placed it neatly on the counter and stood there for a while, letting the refrigerator hum behind me. This was it. The moment I had been walking toward for months. That evening, I called Mr. Ellison. I need one more favor, I told him. We met the next day in his office above the old pharmacy. He closed the door, slid a yellow legal pad in front of him, and said nothing. I want to make a video, I said. His eyebrows rose. Just a little. Not for revenge, I added. For truth. For memory. I want them to hear what they said. I want them to see who they've become. He didn't ask why. Instead, he handed me the name of a man named Derek. Worked in video editing for lawyers. Divorce cases. Depositions. Quiet, discreet. We met in a borrowed office 2 floors down from Ellison's. Derek was younger than I expected. Wore thick glasses and didn't make small talk. When I handed him the flash drive, he nodded once and said, "Give me 3 days." I gave him 5. During that time, I sat at the dining table and pulled out a box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were photo albums. Old prints. Eli in footy pajamas. Eli on Charles's shoulders at the 4th of July parade. His first piano recital, his first bike, the missing front tooth and the gap-toothed smile he wore with pride. I chose carefully. Derek blended them into the first half of the video. Added soft music. The kind that plays during baby showers and graduation ceremonies. A mother's love. That's what we called it. Then came the turn. Derek overlaid scanned documents, loan approvals with my forged signature. A photo of our house with writing scrawled across the back. He cut to audio. Eli's voice. She won't even notice. She never checks the mailbox. Then Chloe. Once she's gone, we can sell most of it. Furniture. Antiques. Whatever. Another voice note. She signed already. She can't back out now. Over each sentence, Derek placed a timestamp. A date. A source file. Then came the pink letter. That neat handwriting. That little heart. It stayed on screen longer than the others. The final slide was plain white text against a black background. This is the truth about Eli Bennett and Chloe Vance. When Derek finished, we sat in silence for a while. He didn't offer opinions. Just looked up and said, "It'll play clean. I've set it to start on a single click." I nodded. Back home, I laid the flash drive beside the invitation. The next day, Eli knocked on my door just before breakfast. He stood in the hallway holding a piece of toast, still buttering it with one hand like he hadn't rehearsed what he was about to say. "So," he began. "We picked a date." I waited. "There's going to be a dinner. Just family and close friends. Chloe wants it to feel special. And, she wants you to come." I looked at him for a long moment. Of course, I said. He looked relieved. Like I had given him something. That night, I opened my closet and pulled out the dark green velvet dress. The one Charles said made me look like I belonged in an old novel. I shook it out, checked the hem. Still intact. Still beautiful. Then I found my mother's pearl earrings. The real ones. Not the costume jewelry I wore when Chloe was around. I set them beside the dress on the vanity and sat down in the chair. The house was quiet. I could hear the pipe settling in the wall. The faint tick of the thermostat clicking on. I looked in the mirror. Not for makeup. Just to see. My face was older than when Charles last looked at it. But my eyes were sharper. Not tired. Not dim. Steady. And I whispered to my reflection, not for the drama of it, but because it needed to be said aloud. Tomorrow, I am no longer someone's mother. I looked in the mirror and said it out loud. Tomorrow, I am no longer someone's mother. The banquet hall smelled like roses and roasted chicken. Soft light glowed from strings of golden bulbs crisscrossing the ceiling. The tables were dressed in ivory linen, every plate set precisely, every wine glass catching the shimmer like a secret. Someone in the back was playing string music through hidden speakers. Classical, but not too serious. Enough to sound expensive. I sat at the head table. Between Eli and Chloe. My dress was the velvet green one. The one Charles loved. My mother's pearls rested on my ears, cool and still. I folded my hands in my lap. The napkin lay untouched beside my plate. They had arranged the seating carefully. Guests of honor up front. Family near the center. A few neighbors, some people from Chloe's side I didn't recognize. All with straight backs and pleasant nods. Chloe looked radiant, of course. Her dress was off-white. Not wedding white, but close. Tastefully tight. It shimmered when she moved. Her hair was curled perfectly. Her lipstick didn't smudge even after 2 glasses of wine. Eli was quiet. He smiled when spoken to, laughed politely when Chloe nudged him. But he didn't look at me. Not once. They passed around small plates, crab cakes, tiny quiches, bruschetta with toppings stacked too tall. I didn't eat. My stomach felt like it had been tied shut. The master of ceremonies, some young man with slicked back hair and a velvet tie, clinked his glass. "May I have your attention," he said with cheer, "for a few words from the bride-to-be." Chloe stood. She lifted her champagne flute and smiled at the room. The smile of someone who already thinks they've won. "Thank you all for being here," she said. "We feel so blessed to share this next chapter with people we love." There were polite nods. The sound of forks settling. She turned toward me. "And I want to give a special thank you to Martha. My future mother-in-law." She paused just long enough. "She has shown such grace and courage in stepping aside, in giving us the space to build our own life. Not every woman of her generation has the self-awareness to make room." The compliment landed like a stone dropped in water. Some guests glanced at me, unsure. A few smiled, awkwardly, not knowing whether it was praise or dismissal. Eli stared at his plate. I kept my face still. The way I'd practiced. Chloe raised her glass. "To fresh starts." A weak wave of clinks echoed through the room. I turned slowly. Caught the eye of the MC, gave a small, deliberate nod. He cleared his throat again. "The groom's mother has prepared a short video. A little surprise, to mark the occasion." A few chuckles. Some polite curiosity. Chloe sat down, the edge of her mouth twitching into a smile. Then the lights dimmed. The projector screen bloomed with light. The music started soft. Familiar. A lullaby I once hummed when Eli had night terrors. The first images appeared, Eli as a baby, fingers sticky with frosting. Eli riding a tricycle down the driveway. Eli falling asleep on Charles's shoulder. A few guests whispered. Chloe relaxed beside me. Her hand rested lightly on Eli's arm. Then the music changed. The next image was a scanned loan agreement. My name at the top. My signature forged. Another document. A property appraisal. Then Eli's voice. She doesn't check the mail. She won't even notice. A ripple moved through the room. Chloe's voice followed. Once she's gone, we can sell most of it. Furniture. Antiques. Whatever. The room stopped breathing. Another slide. The letter in pink ink. She's had her time. Then the audio clips, clear, time-stamped, undeniable. Eli laughing. Chloe estimating what the dining set would fetch. Another clip. She already signed. She can't back out now. Gasps. A knife dropped. A glass tipped slightly. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Chloe stood halfway, as if to stop it, but her feet didn't move. Eli's hands gripped the edge of the table. White-knuckled. I turned to him. Placed my hand gently on his sleeve. He flinched. Sit, I whispered. My voice steady. Clear. You said you wanted an unforgettable evening. I looked my son in the eyes and said. Sit. You said you wanted the night to be unforgettable. The projector clicked off. For a long moment, no one spoke. No clapping. No whispers. Just the sound of the machine cooling down and the weight of every unspoken thought hanging like dust in the light. I stood up. My chair slid back with a soft scrape, the only sound louder than my breath. For 35 years, I said, turning to face them, I've been a mother, a wife, a woman who gave every part of herself to the people she loved. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. And tonight, I am something else entirely. All eyes were on me. But none mattered more than Eli's. He looked stunned, as if the voice on the recording wasn't his own. As if the words hadn't come from his mouth. As if the betrayal wasn't layered, years deep, rehearsed. I lifted my hand. Mr. Ellison stepped forward from the far side of the room, a small leather folder tucked under his arm. His shoes barely made a sound against the polished floor. He opened the folder slowly, deliberately. This is Mr. Ellison, I said. He was my husband's attorney for more than 30 years. Ellison adjusted his glasses. We have verified documentation, he began, that proves Eli Bennett committed mortgage fraud, including the use of forged signatures on a home equity loan. The property in question belongs solely to Martha Bennett. We also possess over 20 hours of recorded audio detailing a coordinated effort by Mr. Bennett and Ms. Vance to remove Mrs. Bennett from her home for financial gain. He looked up. All legal steps have been taken. The bank has been notified. The fraudulent loan has been flagged and halted. Further action is pending. I took a breath. And as of last month, I said, my will has been amended. Eli Bennett is no longer my heir. Every asset, every account, every piece of this home is now assigned to the Riverton Children's Shelter. There were gasps. Someone in the back stood, then sat back down. A chair leg squeaked. A wine glass cracked in someone's grip. Eli shot to his feet. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "Please. Can we just talk? Not here. Just the two of us." I shook my head. No more private conversations. No more hallway whispers. No more pretending. His mouth opened, then closed again. "You're not my son," I said softly. "You're a stranger who lives in my house without permission." Chloe didn't speak. She just stood beside him, jaw tight, eyes scanning the crowd like someone searching for an exit. A way out. There wasn't one. They left in silence. He didn't look back. She led the way. The guests parted like a tide. No one clapped. No one stopped them. Some lowered their eyes. Others just stared. A few mothers held their children's hands more tightly. Mr. Ellison and I stayed behind until the last glass was cleared. The caterers whispered to each other while packing trays. I wiped down the table with a cloth someone handed me. A young man in a black vest offered me water. "You okay, ma'am?" he asked. I smiled. I've never been better. The next morning, I called the locksmith. By noon, the locks had been changed. New keys. New code on the back gate. The house exhaled, as if it had been waiting too. I walked through every room. The guest room, Eli's old room, was empty. I took down the posters he'd once put up as a teenager, rolled up the rug. It would become my reading room. I placed a bookshelf in the corner. Hung a soft curtain by the window. Set a small table near the armchair Charles used to nap in. In the kitchen, I opened the cupboards and touched the edges of every dish. I donated the ones I never liked. Reorganized the spice rack. Lit a candle. Lavender. My choice this time. Neighbors dropped by. Mrs. Colburn from down the street brought tuna casserole and said nothing. Just pressed the dish into my hands and squeezed my wrist gently. Grace came by with swatches of yellow paint and we sat on the porch picking out a new color for the kitchen walls. She didn't ask questions. Just passed me the brush and said, "Let's do something bright." I slept better. Not because it was quiet. It had always been quiet. But now the silence felt clean. Not empty. I opened the windows more. Let the wind in. One night, I stood by the sink and looked out at the backyard. The birdbath still leaned left. The porch light buzzed, then steadied. And I thought to myself, this house has been through a lot. So have I. But neither of us broke. We just had to be cleaned out. Wiped down. Opened up again. The house was quiet. But this time, it was the kind of quiet I chose. The train to Santa Fe left just after dawn. I brought one bag. No suitcase, no checklist, no plans beyond what fit in a paperback tucked under my arm and the quiet hum of a window seat. The sky outside was still pink when we pulled away from the station, that soft hue before the world wakes up enough to disappoint you. I stayed in a small inn just off the plaza. The kind with creaky floors and hand-stitched quilts on the bed. The woman at the desk called me "darlin'" and pointed me toward the best coffee in town without asking if I needed company. I didn't. I walked slowly. Let my heels click on the stone sidewalks, let the sun catch on my shoulders, let myself be unseen. There was a bookstore with a cat asleep in the window. A farmer's market that smelled of roasted green chili and citrus. I joined a book club on accident, just wandered into the back of a community center and stayed when someone handed me tea. No one asked who I was married to. No one asked whose mother I had been. They just let me be a woman in a soft sweater, folding pages instead of folding linens, underlining words that made her sit up straighter. I sent one postcard. To Grace. The front showed 3 red clay pots stacked beside a sun-bleached wall. I wrote only 4 words. I remember how to breathe. When I came home, the house was just as I left it. The porch light worked now. The swing no longer creaked. The yellow in the kitchen was brighter than I expected, cheerful even under cloudy skies. The mail was stacked neatly on the side table. A few catalogs. A water bill. And one envelope with handwriting I hadn't seen in months. Eli. I knew it before I opened it. His handwriting was careful, too careful, like someone afraid of being misread. I stood at the counter. The kettle had just begun to steam. The scent of bergamot rising with the water. I opened the letter with a butter knife. Sat down. He wrote that he was sorry. That he didn't know why he let things go so far. That Chloe had left. That he was trying to find work. That he missed Sunday mornings. That he missed me. He asked if I could ever forgive him. I read it twice. Then folded it once, slowly, and placed it in the drawer next to the spare light bulbs. The same place I kept batteries, twist ties, and that one screwdriver I always lose and always find again. I didn't throw it away. But I didn't answer. Not because I didn't care. But because forgiveness is not a door you walk back through. It's a path you build away from the fire. Brick by brick. Choice by choice. And I had already walked too far. That afternoon, I baked a peach cobbler. Listened to Billie Holiday on the radio. Set one plate at the table. Just one. I ate slowly. Watched the sun move across the kitchen tiles. Let myself smile when I licked the spoon. Later, I stood by the window. The birdbath had been cleaned. The porch was swept. The house was still. But not silent. It was the quiet of peace, not of absence. Not of waiting. Not anymore. I looked at the drawer. Then turned away. Forgiveness doesn't mean returning to pain. And I choose not to go back.